Well, as you probably already know, supporting the singing tone or managing the breath for singing is a really hot topic in singing circles. And while most of us would probably agree that effective management of the breath is foundational to healthy, skillful singing, it's clear that we don't all agree on what that means and how to achieve it. So today, some singing teachers from around the world are going to weigh in on this subject and answer the question, what does it mean to support the singing tone?
Hi, this is Meribeth Dayme on a Friday afternoon in California. I'm the director, founder of CoreSinging, a course based on energy and consciousness and awareness. I've been asked to talk to you about what it means to support the tone. And let me just start by saying that this is kind of a rat's nest of a topic, because historically it's meant different things at different times. And what it ends up being too often is an argument about where to push, where to pull, what muscles to use, where to squeeze, and all kinds of things like this. Let me just say up front, what I believe support is a balanced system of pressure within the whole instrument, which would then give you the efficiency of sound and efficiency of onset of sound and efficiency of using the sound in terms of your imagination and how you use your voice. And what do I mean by systems of pressures? Just taking all muscles away and everything else, we've got three areas in the body that are related to pressure. One is the abdomen. It has no air in it, but it is at the mercy of what's happening around it. So it's, to all intents and purposes, it is a closed system, but anytime, for instance, that the diaphragm goes down, then it's going to move things around and create more or less pressure in it. Above it, you've got a chest, which is almost a closed system. It's closed anytime your vocal folds are closed, and you can feel that when you do that. You can feel all these systems against each other. And then the last system is the vocal tract and mouth, which of course is wide open in some ways. So how do we balance these pressures? Well, pressure from the abdomen creates pressure underneath the vocal folds, which is a subglottic pressure. And then what keeps them from going bleh like that? Well, it's the pressure that comes back from the mouth, which means that I can feel that if I do that, because I've created back pressure by closing my lips. When we're singing or speaking, it means that the air isn't directly squirted out the mouth. It's sent up against the hard palate or soft palate, and you get resistance from the lips, from the teeth. And when you get that resistance, it creates a back pressure on top of the vocal folds, and then you've got a balance. If any one of these balances is out, like somebody's got a tight tummy, or somebody has leaky vocal folds, then none of them work. So for me, it is always a matter of balance of these three pressures. Then I'll go back and look at what muscles do it. So that is me in a nutshell. We were given 2 to 3 minutes to answer this question. That's my answer to it. And it's so dependent on your balance, your physical balance, your mental balance, your concepts of what you're doing when you're making sound. It's just a whole pile of things. So to me, in all honesty, I think I'd throw the word out. So that's my 2 bits today. Thank you.
What does it mean to support your singing? I used to think it meant someone else would pay for my voice lessons. But no, support, man, this is one of those words where what the heck does it mean? It's one of those things that voice teachers will debate, ties into the whole breathing thing. I know great voice teachers who will just absolutely focus on breathing, and breathing is everything. And I know brilliant voice teachers who really kind of leave breathing alone and keep it very, very simple. And they both get great results. But for me, since you asked, I view support as something that is a result. You basically have, when you're breathing in, yeah, and then the diaphragm drops and we feel the stomach pop out and we start to exhale, okay? We need a resistance. Otherwise, the breath just flies out of us. So that resistance now gives us something to press against. As the air is beginning to go out, this hissing is now blocking the air. And so my abdominal muscles have to press against that. And that is a feeling of support. I feel like I'm pressing against or supporting the hiss. Thus, when I'm singing, I'm getting the same resistance from the vocal cords or vocal folds closing over. They're closing over, compressing that air, and they're momentarily in that opening and closing, they're resisting the air and allowing air pressure to build up. And I'm pressing against that, which gives a feeling of support. I view good support as a balance between the air flow and the resistance at the folds or the muscle, air versus muscle. Good support, there's a nice balance of the resistance, too much air or too much vocal cord, and then that resistance starts to get thrown. Otherwise, yeah, support is just one of those nebulous words that we voice teachers can argue about endlessly. And I don't know if anyone's ever told you, but we love to argue.
Hi, my name is Nancy Boss. I'm a voice teacher in the Seattle area. I'm also the author of a couple of books. One of them, the name of Singing 101, is a book where I really thought in depth about this concept of what is support and how do we communicate that to students who don't have any internal definition of that word, or perhaps they've been hearing that word their whole lives, for decades even, and don't really understand what it means. Let me start out by saying I don't use the word support and I hate the word support. I've never understood it. My entire learning career, when support was the word to use regarding how we take care of our breath in relationship to our singing, I thought of support like a table leg, like the kind of table where it's just one table with one big columnar leg in the middle of it. That is the support for your voice, and it has to be solid and strong. And that's what I thought support was. You know, nothing's going to tip this table over. And I've seen students my own age and older who not only think of support as, and I'm talking about professional singers who are confused about this, not only think of support as that kind of rigidity, but on top of that, they still subconsciously have in their minds that more is better. There are choral directors who say, I want more support. Choir, more support from the altos. What does this mean? Oh my gosh, a lot of people think that more support means more breath pressure. So I say get rid of that word. That word means the correct thing, if there is a correct thing, to so few people. So how do we talk about breath in the context of singing, solo singing, or choral singing without using that word? What word do we use? I prefer balance. And I bet I'm not the first person in this video series to say balance, because what we need to balance is the energy flow through the resistance. Now the resistance is the vocal folds and perhaps the muscles of the throat and the mouth, depending on what genre you're singing in. But at the very minimum and perhaps maximum, the resistance is the vocal folds. How strongly, how rigidly do we want to hold the vocal folds to resist the air that's coming through, to create sound, to create pitch, to create the sound that we're looking for, but just to create sound? In most cases, the goal is to have the vocal folds be somewhat flexible, not rigid, not tight, not a strong gate fighting against the air column that's pushing up from the lungs as hard as it can, like that. And we also don't want the vocal folds to be too weak and wimpy, just flapping in the breeze, right? We need a balance between the vocal fold tension and the air pressure that's coming through the vocal folds. Therefore, how do we control that balance? Well, one of the first things is to make sure we're not squeezing too tight at the vocal folds or being too loose. But beyond that, we have to control the amount of air coming through the throat. We oftentimes do that through expansion of core muscles, and that could be the rib cage, it could be the abdomen, or it could be a combination of both. When we expand in the core, the ribs and the abdomen, we are stopping the air from flowing out so quickly, and we're resisting forcing the air out with a controlled release of air. A lot of people don't like the word control when it comes to singing. I haven't come up with a better word. I've heard management. That's a bit ambiguous to me. I think we literally do want to control how much air goes past the vocal folds. So that's the concept that I work with my students, is finding the balance of speed and intensity of air to how much resistance there is in the vocal folds. Thank you.
What does it mean to support your singing, tone, voice? I don't know really. My idea of support is essentially a relationship between the vocal cords and the diaphragm. The more the vocal cords compress together, the more the diaphragm has to work to get to push enough air through so that there's a balance in the relationship. So it's a balance in the relationship between the cords and the diaphragm. And I guess that's what I would mean by support. I don't really use that term directly. I just talk about the relationship when people ask.
Hi, I'm Kristin Jensen with the Singing Savvy Voice Studios in Salt Lake City, Utah. My thoughts on why breath management and its role in singing are these. First of all, we have a wind instrument. That means that breath is what funds our instrument. It's what fuels our instrument. In the same way that using a bow on the violin string causes tension and creates vibrations of sound and sound waves coming from the violin strings, breath going through the vocal folds creates vibrations in those tissues, and those create sound waves. We couldn't even speak without breath, let alone sing. So it's really foundational to learning how to sing correctly. Obviously, we use breath differently for singing than we do in speaking. Depending on the genre of the piece, we're going to use breath more intense or slightly less intense. Like, for example, in operatic singing, we're very much intensifying the breath because we want to maximize the intensity of the sound waves that are bouncing around in our acoustic track and create what is called the singer's formant, or an acoustic effect that allows the singer's voice to cut through an orchestra without amplification and be heard clearly through the back of the hall. In other genres of music where there is a lot of amplification by microphone, it is not as necessary to create as much pressure in the breath stream to create the type of sound that you want. But in order to have a singing voice that is not muscled with laryngeal muscles, it's really important to learn how to pressurize, how to use the abdominal wall, the diaphragm indirectly, as well as the muscles in between the rib cage, the intercostal muscles, to create a compression of breath. And what that means is that we use less actual volume of breath, but a greater intensity of breath. So the breath stream is going to be smaller. Think instead of fire hose like a laser beam. And we're going to manage that very subtly by using those muscle apertures that I mentioned just a moment ago to create this pressurized breath stream. And by using that pressurized breath stream, we can use that to move pitch without muscling in the larynx, and so that the muscles of the larynx that respond to our ear hearing pitch and automatically make adjustment for what our ears are hearing, they can just do their job and they are not overworked. We're not putting any extra pressure on them, and we're doing the job through the breath. And that is a much more healthy way to produce sound than the alternative, which is just grabbing in the larynx and muscling things up. So another benefit of creating a strong breath stream and working with breath management is that it creates a much more pleasant quality of sound. Usually it will bring a singer, when they get onto their breath, will create a really lovely core of their voice. They'll find the core. They'll have much easier access into the upper ranges. When I get my students singing with enough breath pressure, usually almost an octave immediately opens up to their access, because without pressurizing the breath, it's very difficult to get into head voice in a healthy way without muscling everything. So there are lots and lots and lots of wonderful benefits to breath management. Also, another one is that it creates an environment where the laryngeal muscles can relax and the larynx position can stay low if the breath is doing the work of the voice. And then our acoustic tract can be lengthened and relaxed, and we can have optimal acoustic effect because the larynx is in a low position and there is no tension in the laryngeal muscles here. So these are the benefits that I see for developing a strong kinesthetic sense of breath management and really mastering that. Obviously, it is, I believe, absolutely the most foundational piece of a healthily produced singing voice. Thank you.
What does it mean to support your singing tone or voice? It means to make a sound you like. What does it mean if someone else instructs you to support your singing tone more or less? It means to make a sound they like. That's all it ever is, sound. Yes, there's lots of physiology and physics behind the different sounds we make, but the sounds are always changing, so the behavior is ever changing. And there's no physical representation, no tactile representation in our brains for the diaphragm or the vocal folds. So the two major players in that discussion of whether something is supported correctly or not can't be felt. So to focus on the mechanics of singing is a very ambiguous command. Instead, the outcome is really our goal. So we should use adjectives. We should think in adjectives. Richer, fuller, brighter, darker. This gives the brain a lot of wiggle room in terms of dialing up specific behaviors to feed each particular sound you ask for.
On support, one could write a dissertation. I'm going to try to keep it very practical and simple. What is supporting your voice? It's basically using your laughing muscles. When we laugh, really do a belly laugh, a natural belly laugh, hearty laugh, our torso muscles contract, sending puffs of air up past our vocal cords, which then causes this pattern of laughter. Now, what is singing? Singing is basically a sustained laugh. We need a consistent airflow passing through our vocal cords to sustain a note. One added thing I'd like to mention is you can think of it as follows. Using a bicycle pump, you close the one end and you push on the other, and you're going to feel sort of a buoyancy and elasticity. This is what we should be feeling with the air in our lungs. When you breathe in properly, we've got an extended rib cage, and with our torso muscles and our intercostal muscles, we try and compress this air almost like the air in the bicycle pump, so that we don't just push all the air up from beneath through our vocal cords. We sort of use this compressed air like we would use the gas pedal of a car. If we're driving 80 miles an hour, we need a certain consistent foot pressure on the gas pedal to allow the car to drive that fast. Look at your vocal line. It's going to have ups and downs and sustained periods of the same pitch. Think of it as driving a car. You're going to be needing more air energy, a little bit less, a little bit more, as the contour of your vocal line dictates. This is basically what it is to support your voice when you sing.
Hi singers, my name's Christopher David Mitchell, vocal coach here in London, and today I want to talk about the hot topic in the vocal world, that is, What is breath support? What does it mean to support your singing voice? Now, this term support and a lot of other terms we use really came from our Italian friends here, and that came from the word appoggio, excuse my pronunciation, which really means to lean on as well as support. But I actually really especially like the lean on the breath. I've heard some teachers talk about. But my personal preference is resistance, to resist the breath, resist the air. I would define breath support as resistance of the air leaving the body. A common myth about breath support has been use the diaphragm, sing it from the diaphragm, but really the diaphragm is an inhale only muscle and singing is hopefully happening on the exhale. It's really the muscles of the torso that are helping us to resist this exhalation. Things like rectus abdominis. It's all the muscles that you feel engage when you are resisting that air. A little bit of fun for you here. If I do this, is the diaphragm working? Yes, it is. The diaphragm's always working. You can stop it temporarily if you hold your breath, but the diaphragm is always working. Within singing, your breath is really the power source. Think of it like a car. Nearly everyone drives, hopefully. So with this car analogy, think of the breath support as literally the gas pedal. If you're blowing a lot of air, you're literally slamming on the gas pedal or the accelerator all the time, which is going to blow up the engine. It's going to tire out the whole system. So that's probably the biggest problem where singers go wrong and they're not supporting, is they don't have control of their power source. They basically don't have control of the gas pedal if it was a car. What the voice wants is a steady stream of air. So the point of breath support is for you to be in complete control of your power supply, which is the breath. You want to be able to put through a really steady stream of air, really consistent. If it's too much air, like we say, the vocal folds are going to work harder to resist all that air. Too little air, there's not going to be enough to keep everything going. And also changes in breath pressure. If you're putting through a tiny bit and then you're putting through a lot and there's changes, the vocal folds are always going to be wondering what's going to be coming at them. They really just want an even gas pedal on that car so they can then really change the gears. The singing system, as you could call it, is really made up of power, breath, source, the vocal folds, and filter, resonance. Power, source, filter, breath, vocal folds, resonance. All three play a major part. You'll hear some coaches just talking about the resonance. Oh, it's all about the resonance, it's all about the formants and the harmonics and the acoustic energy. You'll hear other voice teachers just talking about the vocal folds, saying this is the instrument and all the work's done here. And then you'll hear other teachers just talking about breath, just talking about the power source, saying this is the key to everything, where really one always affects the other. They are all working together at once. If one is not working properly, then it's going to affect the vocal folds. If the breath's not working properly, it's going to affect the vocal folds. If the vocal folds aren't doing the right thing, it's going to affect the resonance. It all has to work together. So all equally important in making you the best singer you can be.
What does it mean to support the singing tone? So I'd actually like to cite Seth Riggs here. He's come up with a very comprehensive explanation as to what that is. So he says, air coming up onto the vocal cords versus muscular resistance of that air. And the aim is to get a perfect marriage of the two things. Support, airflow and chord resistance is something that happens naturally, but you can work with it and utilize it and optimize it to give the best singing tone. So a very common exercise that singing teachers give to students is the shh exercise. And this actually works better if you then relate that to the tone. So you can get that feeling with the shh of getting that perfect marriage of air coming over and air being resisted. Shh. It feels very deliberate, very controlled. If it swings in the wrong balance, you either get shh like that, so there's too much compression there, shh, or you get shh, where you just kind of deflate. So getting that just in the middle, shh, is what you want. And you can do that on different volumes. So if you imagine that you're shushing a baby to sleep, shh, shh, shh. It's very deliberate, but it's soft. And then you can relate it to a tone. She. So you've got that perfect marriage there. I can feel the core engaging, and I can feel the resistance happening here, but it's all very free. It feels like the air is moving through very freely. And you can do that on a medium volume. So if you imagine a librarian telling people to shush, shh, she. So there you've got your medium volume, but it's still in a perfect 50-50 relationship. And then a high intensity one, shh, shh, a more aggressive one, shh, she. And there you've got your high intensity or loud singing. And once you're able to do those, you can start to experiment with then tipping the scales as an artistic choice. So a particularly good one that works well is if you take the baby one, shh, so there's your marriage, she, and then if you put more air over that, she, la 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 la. So you've got some audible air coming through, and that's used all the time in contemporary music. You can do things like on the high intensity one, you can give more compression. So there you can do vocal effects like growl and distortion and things like that. If you're singing with support, it's all a little bit more deliberate and less passive. Even though airflow and chord resistance is happening all the time, otherwise there wouldn't be a tone. Being more deliberate about that is what gives the feeling of support, and it gives the optimum tone. So if I'm being slightly passive, yeah, 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 there's some engagement of the chord there, and obviously there's some resistance at chord level because there's a tone coming through. But because I'm being a little bit passive about it and not fully engaging, I feel like everything's kind of jamming up into the nose and it's latching onto the wrong muscles. It needs to latch on somewhere, and if it's not latching onto the right areas, it's going to latch onto the wrong areas, and then that's when you get a kind of ugly tone. So if you do go to do a shh, especially the intense one, the air will automatically rush down into the bottom of the lungs. So taking the breath low is very important. It naturally does that if you're going for a sh, but actually being aware of keeping the chest high, just having a nice posture and taking the air in low. For me, I don't like to take it too low. I like it to be kind of here in the middle on the triangular bit where the ribs meet. I think it depends on your frame and your height as to where you feel it. And those feelings of taking in a good breath do tend to be quite subjective in my experience. I like to feel just a little gust going in, and I just feel the very top of the ribs here just coming out, just ever so slightly. Doesn't need to be massive amounts of air. And then once you've done that, everything's engaged, and then you can deliberately engage things here. And to me, that's support.
I rarely use the word support because, for me at least, it seems to conjure up too much tension. But if I were to use the word support in my teaching as a positive instruction, I would communicate it in relation to a buoyant body state. That is, a body that is well grounded with a muscular mechanic that is fluent and not fixed. I know that many singers use the term support in relationship to breathing, but again, I'm not overly enamoured with the term.
Hi there, my name's Tom Gareau, and I'm a vocal coach here in Luxembourg, although I'm formerly from Cambridge and Boston, Massachusetts. Today I've been asked, what is support? What is supporting the voice? What does that mean? Personally, it's not a term that I use in my studio. I prefer to use a more holistic term, like feeding the voice in this case. So what are you feeding to your voice? Does it need a vowel? Does it need a better source signal? Does it need better posture? Are you lined up? Does it need some sort of urge to communicate? Does it need a continuation of the energy or subdivision of the vowel? Does it need more compression of the breath? Now, every single pitch, vowel, intensity combination that you want to sing is going to have a different combination of all of these things, and those things together I call the body response. So every pitch, intensity, vowel combination has a different body response. So how do we train singers to be flexible, but also be confident and curious and willing to explore what their body can do? In short, we have negative pressure, which is brought to us by expanding the body, maintaining an expanded state. You can tell I'm talking about the ribs, I'm talking about the descent of the diaphragm. And this is where terms like inhalare la voce, inhaling the voice, comes from. Or like imagine you're drinking out of a big cup when you sing. These things try to keep us expanded to prevent too much pressure from building up. Then we have the more active approaches to kind of compressing the abdominal cavity, compressing the viscera, your guts, against that thoracic cavity to increase pressure. So we have this struggle, this muscular antagonism, if you would, between the negative pressure and the positive pressure, and those come together and they create the pressure beneath the glottis. And of course it's more complicated than this. We have muscles that maybe are more efficient at compressing the breath because they assist in creating a tall posture. So maybe they will be prioritized for usage over other muscles like the rectus abdominis that is going to actually put you into a crunch if you employ it too much. But at the end of the day, if you're a musical theater singer especially, you might be dancing. You may not have the luxury of assuming a tall, easy to manage posture, like maybe somebody singing a recital of art song or a recital of opera arias where we kind of just get to stand there and make sure things are free and open and all that good voice teachery motions there, right? Yeah, so I guess support to me is that relationship of positive and negative pressure. And if somebody needs to support better, they need to know, do I need to compress my breath more? Am I compressing too much? Am I using maybe a muscle that I don't need to engage right now, that maybe isn't so efficient for what I'm going for, that's maybe locking me elsewhere in the body? Are my vocal folds not coming together well enough to make this matter? You know, you can't maintain a shape or a body posture if the valve is broken. So yeah, long story short, negative pressure, positive pressure, balance those forces underneath a well-adducted voice, and I guess that's what you would call support.
Hi Karyn, this is Shannon Coates, as you know. What does it mean to support your singing tone or voice? Well, that is a question, isn't it? And so the term support has, for me, it's not very meaningful actually, and I don't use it. I tend not to use it in my studio or when I'm working with singers. Mostly because we have so many different ideas of what that term means, which is part of the reason I'm sure you have it in your list of questions. We have so many different ideas about what that term means, and it means something different to basically everyone you ask. And we don't have a really good physiological definition of support. At least not one that we can sort of apply across the board. So because of that, and because of how amorphous that term is, I find it not very useful. The other reason I find it not useful is that the actual word itself engenders structure and tension and holding and all of these things that we don't particularly want to encourage in our singing and in our students' singing. So words that I use instead, I talk about breath energy quite a lot. I talk about subglottal air pressure. I talk about sensations in the body of buoyancy, but also access to the access to movement in the body. But also we talk about inhalation and how the body works with inhalation. And I do talk about muscular antagonism between the muscles of inhalation and the muscles of exhalation, and maintaining this sensation of openness and a released buoyant openness as we're exhaling or singing, and maintaining that sensation on the exhale or as we're singing, and how that sensation of maintaining this openness and maintaining this buoyant openness is likely the best way to have support. So when I have students or when I'm working with singers who for whom support means something, then I tend to try to break it down for them and try to work with them to find out what support, when they feel they are supporting well, what is actually happening physiologically in their bodies, and to try to break that down from all the way from the inhalation into, and the preparation for the inhalation even, into the actual singing, so that they have a really good understanding physiologically and anatomically of what's happening in their bodies as they are supporting. And then we do try to give it a little bit of a different term, and we do try to, like I said, move that terminology a little bit so that we're not assigning something that seems a little bit locking to their singing process. So I hope that helps.
What does it mean to support your singing tone/voice? Man, that is an epic question. What does it mean to support your singing? You know, as a young singer, I couldn't have told you. I did not understand. I heard people say, support, and I had no idea how to achieve what they were talking about. I'm a little further down the path now, and I would say that it has something to do with a combination of optimal fold closure and the breath that you apply against that fold closure. It's always, for me, it's about a balance inside the body, I guess. Connection of the body to your tonal goal, that color that you're looking for and how your body is gonna achieve it is part of support. But it's tough. It's understanding that balance, how much air pressure I apply against the folds, and it's something that you develop through time in conversation with a teacher, and you try and you try and try, and sometimes you get it and it's awesome, it works great, and sometimes you fail and you take a look at that and see what you can do better. So I don't believe there's any nutshell answer for this. I think support is going to mean different things to different people, different things to different teachers. So basically it's just a system of trial and error to get the breath to feed the tonal goal that you want to achieve. And again, we're always speaking within a context of healthy output and released output and something authentic sounding rather than something manufactured or forced. Wow.
Like many teachers, I don't typically use the word support because for some singers, it implies the need to sort of brace themselves which can lead to a lot of inflexibility. And so I instead use the term breath management, which to me suggests more of a flexible control and communication and this sort of cooperative participation between the various parts of the voice system in a joint effort to produce the kinds of sounds that we want to produce. In order to make sound, the vocal folds inside the larynx need to be brought together and set into vibration. And that vibration produces the initial sound source signal that later gets shaped and amplified by the resonator tract. But in order to be set into vibration, those vocal folds require energy, they require breath. And so the primary responsibility of the breath management system is to supply the vocal folds with what they need to be able to do their jobs effectively. However, what they need is constantly changing throughout the song, which is why an inflexible approach to breath management is not effective. There's a really critical relationship between the muscles that draw the vocal folds together and keep them together so that they can vibrate and generate that sound source signal and also provide resistance to the air and the breath management musculature. They're in constant communication with each other. If we wish to create an intense sound, for example, the vocal folds increase their resistance to the exiting air, while the breath management muscles compress the air further, creating higher pressures, higher subglottal pressures. If we wish to create an airy tone, a breathy tone, then the vocal folds offer much less resistance, and the breath management system doesn't need to generate as high a subglottal pressure, and air just passes a lot more freely with less resistance past the vocal folds. There is a constant communication, and it's all about maintaining an optimal balance between what happens here and what happens here. And so the long and short of it to me is that breath management really is about the breath management system, that musculature of the torso and the back and the abdomen, providing the vocal folds, supplying them, feeding them what they need, and to remain ever in tune to those constantly changing needs.
Hi there, Chris Johnson of The Naked Vocalist. What does support mean? Well, we could boil it down to something very, very simple initially, which would be the amount of airflow and lung pressure required to sustain a sound. And whatever that sound is, it's conceived in your head. Maybe it's a call, maybe it's crying with vibrato on it, I don't know, whatever it is, that setting at the vocal fold level is going to need an amount of airflow that can get it to begin vibrating and sustain vibration in a healthy manner. Now that's going to be largely contributed to what goes on in the body, and the support mechanism, the muscles that have been identified as being part of delivering airflow in singing is massive. There's so many. I don't know how many, should have counted, but there's a lot. So it can seem complicated in that sense, and it can seem to many that that leaves many things that could go wrong along the chain of the muscles that deliver airflow, which is also true. But we're in this position of difficulty, not because singing is difficult and because support is complicated, but rather because the way we live as modern humans pulls us out of nature's wonderful efficiencies. The way we sit, I'm currently sitting like it now, hunched over with my head hanging forward. We're much less fit than we were as cave people, I should imagine, and we use our voices in a very shrunken manner, very low pitch and very quiet. In essence, all we do is talk all day, and then we have the mind behind it. So that's what can create this problem. But if we can boil it down to, if we happen to be fit and active, then, and we can stand well, then some of the support mechanisms of the lower abdomen that drive air out of us towards the larynx, the transverse abdominis being one of those muscles that is commonly mentioned, if that is fit and that is active, then we are going to be expelling air from our body for the purposes of singing in a better way than a lot of the muscles that actually surround the rib cage and the torso. And in modern singers, you see a lot of activity around here inappropriately, with very little activity going on in the muscles that require, or that we require. So we have to consider the body being a balloon. If the lower abdominal muscles squeeze the bottom of the balloon, then that drives air outwards towards the larynx and fuels that voice quality. Now, support doesn't end there, of course, and it's more complicated than that, but it's very rare that we're going to deliver the right amount of support, the right amount of air supply to that larynx, because it's just impossible for us to be that accurate. All we have to do is drive air, and then we need mechanisms in the upper body in order to allow that drive of air to calibrate to the setting at the larynx. Now, as that airflow meets the larynx resists it, because that's what it does. The vocal folds are together, so pressure builds up behind the larynx. And for me, a massive part of the support mechanism is when pressure builds up behind the larynx, what do we have in order to dissipate that pressure, to relieve it from underneath the larynx so that the larynx doesn't crack. And that's where we get into the muscles of the rib cage, the intercostals being a huge part of it, and all of the muscles that surround the rib cage. If we squeeze the balloon of the body from the bottom, and the knot is the larynx, if that air can't escape through the larynx because the voice quality is going to be a bigger voice quality and it's going to be loud, then we would like the upper part of the balloon, our rib cage, to expand and take that pressure away from the larynx. In which case we might feel that our support for the tone is really great because we've delivered air, and any excess pressure has been dissipated, has been relieved from the larynx by the rib cage, and that has allowed an entire calibration of air to voice, so that they end up being a little bit more happy, a little bit more in synergy. Then singing itself is a lot easier. And as I said before, as modern humans, we could get very complicated about which muscles we switch on to deliver air and which muscles we switch off or on to allow us to relieve pressure in the upper body. But in truth, posture and alignment consolidates all of that information for us in a big way. Not entirely, of course. We can do extra things to energize the sound, but goodness me, there's so many singers out there that can literally just benefit from postural adjustment and physical fitness in order to achieve a level of support, a level of appropriate airflow and pressure that can help the larynx to sustain its voicing. One small part of support, though, which does also relate to posture, is the resonance support that happens above. And the only reason I mention that is because we might have to overuse muscles in our body that we wouldn't ordinarily need to be driving air. If the resonance that we generate through our vowels and through our throat and mouth spaces, if that is low, if that is not energized, then our output will be low and our effort to generate volume will have to go up, and that will go up from the body and quite often the throat. So in the sense of singers trying to find a vocal tract, articulators that are flexible and respond to our emotional connection to make sound, then they're going to be available to create very helpful shapes that boost resonance, and that resonance boost will help the vocal folds come together. It will help them make contact and self-sustain sound for much, much longer in any phrase, any song, and in any day. So we can't discount how much resonance changes what happens to the vocal folds and how they come together, and how that then changes the requirement of support, the requirement of appropriate airflow to drive that process. So the better resonance, the less pressure and flow is required in order to sustain certain voice qualities. So that is my very long-winded, apologies, scratching the surface of support.
What does support mean to me? So this is a little bit tricky because I tend not to use the word support in my studio. I find that it's one of those words that can make singers lock up and become quite rigid and inflexible in their bodies, or can cause singers to simply start to blow too much air. But I will say that it's not an uncommon concern from beginning singers. When beginners come into my studio for their first lesson, I often hear some variation on, "I wish that I had better breath support." And when a student says this to me, I say to them, can we unpack that a little bit and see if I can understand what you mean by saying you wish you had better support? What's the concern? And so one singer might say to me, "My voice feels unsupported. I'm unable to get to the end of a phrase of music." And another singer might say, "My voice feels unsupported. My tone is breathy and it's weak." And one singer might say, "Well, if I had better support for my high notes, I would have an easier time reaching them." So we have 3 different singers, each with 3 different concerns, all of which may be attributed in the beginning mind to breath support, when in reality, these 3 different concerns are an inefficiency of air to get to the end of the phrase, right? The second singer expressed breathiness, so an inability to fully close the vocal folds to produce a tone that is fully present. And for the third singer, a problem of registration and range, and registration problems rarely are solved by blowing more air. So looking at these 3 things, we see how important it is to work diagnostically with the singer who's in the room rather than in generalizations. So I hesitate a little to offer truisms about support. But I will say that when I talk about the breath as a teacher, I talk a great deal about flexibility in the body, about flexibility in the rib cage, especially in the back ribs, allowing them to flex and elongate, where the lungs are housed, right? The structures over the lungs, which have no voluntary movement of their own, is really essential. I will also talk about efficiency of air, so taking in as much air as you need, not stacking the breath, so taking extra inhalations, and not becoming locked or rigid in the body. It really is all about efficiency of airflow. And so an alternative to the word support, rather than thinking supporting the voice, I might suggest feeding the voice or feeding the tone, which suggests, right, flowing phonation, that it's gradual and on an as-needed basis, and that it's all about maintaining that presence and clarity without overblowing the vocal folds.